Hey guys, we're back talking about our Cob house here, and I'm doing a video to talk about my clay. Uh, this is it here. It's very tough stuff. Obviously, it's not as hard as a rock, but it's pretty close. And so what I have is I have a large pile, and I dug most of this pile out from this lake. Well, lake. From this small pond here. And I have changed my method a couple of times now. So in the beginning, what we were doing is taking raw clay, large chunks, and taking maybe 10 of these very large kind of mineralic tubs for cattle and their livestock. So I take a bunch of those, put large chunks of clay in there, and then put water on there, let them soften up, come back with a shovel, and kind of churn it, chop them up, and this whole process would have to be tended to several times over the course of weeks. And that would be enough clay for only a few sessions of, a couple of days of people coming over. And, or just me doing it by myself with a mortar mixer. So that was a choke point, right? So how much clay could I actually make at one time? And then what I did is I changed to using this. It's a tamp. It's an 8x8. I'm sure most of y'all know what that is for, but if you don't, it's for packing down soil, other kinds of things, maybe knocking, things into place. So what I was using it for, is I would take those same big pieces of clay, and I would put them in a bucket like this, but without any water, empty and very dry, and I would break them up using the tamp. And what happened is I went from waiting for weeks to get my nice, soft, slurry clay mix from that big, chunky stuff like this to a few days. It could be 4 days, it could be 2, depending on how much I broke it up. And that was a big change. But before, there was a lot of labor getting the larger chunks, and with the smaller ones, there was less labor, but it was more intense, right? 30 minutes of tamping is a pain. So, in the years building up to building my Cob house, I started to discover that in certain countries and the continent of Africa, and in many places, people were pulling clay out of the bottom of lakes. For them, it was seasonal. The dry season comes, and the lake would dry up, and they'd take it. And there's actually a large, Cob Palace that gets a fresh coat from the bottom of this lake, I think, every year. And so that was really interesting because I actually intended to make a pond out of the place where I was scraping my clay out of, and over quite a bit of work, I did make a big pond. And so before it filled up this year, I leveled everything out and started prepping a certain area to pull clay straight out of the pond. So we're talking about 4 or 5 hours to get to the point where you're going to make cob with that clay. And now we go down to the edge of the water, or I actually just take my boots off and go in. My friend Simon usually just stands on the edge, and either way, we just kind of scoop clay from the bottom of our pond into feed buckets, just feed buckets for the horses. And it takes 2 buckets of clay per batch of what you're going to put in the mortar mixer. So if you're doing that much clay all day, you usually do about 8 buckets. And that whole thing maybe takes 30 or 45 minutes. It's not very long. It does add some time. But I mean, you can do it all at once in the morning. We just pull it over with a wagon. So I mean, it was a drastic reduction in the amount of time and labor, because I was starting to get worried with some of our previous methods. And even with the previous methods, not only did I have to do all that labor, but I actually had to go pick up the buckets with the tractor and load them 2 at a time and take them over to the site area because, well, you know why? Because they're full of clay and water at that moment. So, this is just completely different. Now, it doesn't mean I wasn't concerned, and I still have some concerns when I'm pulling it out of the lake, pond, whatever. It does have more organic material. All of this comes in as drainage, as you can see. And I kind of carved out a little drainage canal from across my property from another property. So this is just watershed, filling up my pond here, but it brings silt, it brings rocks as it goes near our road, it brings a bunch of sand. So I had to change my sand mixture because I was worried that if I actually was taking clay from a sandy spot and I wasn't having, doing a water soil test where you shake up your jar of water with a little bit of soil, and how it settles will tell you something about what's in your soil. I'm not going to do that every day when I'm doing cob, so I reduced my parts of sand to account for the fact that one day I might have more sand and I didn't want to have some structural problems in my building. So, and I guess in the end, what I'm trying to convey here is when I started this cob project, I didn't know what my relationship was going to be to some of these materials. Clay was much harder than I thought it was going to be. The sand, I get the sand out of my creek, so I'm lucky to have both my clay and my sand for free. But the sand has been another choke point because sometimes it's too hard to get in and out of the creek. But it's good sand, and that'll be in a subsequent video when I talk about that. And I hope this kind of better explained the clay process and how we're choosing to make it a little different. Thanks for watching. Have a great day, guys.